I am lying face down in wet grass, my arm dislocated in a way arms are not supposed to dislocate, watching a jackrabbit stand completely still 15 feet away, staring at me with the calm, unbothered expression of an animal that has just ruined someone's entire week. 10 seconds earlier, I had been sprinting full speed across an Idaho hillside, absolutely convinced, the way only a young idiot can be convinced, that I was fast enough to catch it. I was not. Nobody is. That's actually the whole point of this video, but we'll get there. The rabbit didn't run away, not really. It let me get close, almost personally close, and then it did something that felt less like fleeing and more like it was toying with me. A hard cut left, a snap right, a full body direction reversal so violent I heard my own knee do something it had never done before, followed immediately by me becoming airborne in a way that had nothing to do with athleticism and everything to do with physics disagreeing with my life choices. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up here. Oh, hey there. I should mention I've been dead for a while now, long enough that a while stopped meaning anything specific, long enough that I've had time to just watch, wander around, mostly invisible, mostly ignored, sitting in the front row of nature's most chaotic theater for what might be centuries at this point. Turns out, being a ghost comes with incredible seating. Nobody shoos you away from a den, nobody tells you to keep the noise down near a nest, because you're not making noise, you're not making heat, you're basically a very nosy piece of weather. And in all that time, one thing keeps coming up over and over across every continent, every species, every ecosystem I've drifted through. There are animals that are, for all practical purposes, impossible to catch. Not impossible because they're the fastest thing alive. Not impossible because they're invincible. Impossible because they've spent millions of years turning your entire nervous system into their favorite toy. This isn't a video about speed records. Forget speed records. Speed is boring. Speed is the thing humans obsess over because we like leaderboards. What we're actually talking about is something far weirder, the physics, psychology, and evolutionary math of why certain animals can be standing right in front of a predator and still functionally be untouchable. So, let's get into it, and let's start with the animal that broke my arm and my ego on the same afternoon. Here's what you need to understand about a jackrabbit and about hares in general. They are not actually trying to outrun you. That's the part that took me embarrassingly long to figure out, and I had the advantage of being dead and having nothing but time to think about it. A hare's top speed is fast, sure, somewhere in the range of 40 miles an hour depending on species. Impressive. Not the point. The point is what happens in the half second before and after that top speed. The jackrabbit isn't racing you in a straight line. It's running a geometry problem it already knows the answer to, and you don't. When a predator commits to a chase, it builds momentum. Momentum is great in a straight line and catastrophic in a turn. A coyote at full sprint has a turning radius, basically the tightest curve its body can carve without losing control, of several meters. A jackrabbit with a much lighter frame and hips built like hinges instead of struts can reverse direction almost instantly, converting nearly all its forward momentum into lateral momentum in one motion. So the chase isn't a race, it's an ambush in reverse. The jackrabbit lets the predator get fast, and speed is exactly what betrays it. Why would evolution build an animal that runs toward danger before cutting away from it? Because the zigzag only works if the predator is already committed. A jackrabbit sprinting in a straight line the whole time would just be outrun eventually by a faster, more persistent predator. But a jackrabbit that waits until the coyote is at maximum speed, then cuts hard, forces the predator to either overshoot wildly or slam the brakes, both of which cost time, cost energy, and often cost the meal entirely. This is chess, except one player set the board on fire. The jackrabbit isn't reacting in panic. It's reacting on a script millions of years old, executing a plan its ancestors road-tested against wolves, foxes, eagles, and apparently me. Fast fact 1. Some hares can change direction with almost no loss of speed because their hind limb muscles are asymmetrically built, stronger on one side, allowing for a kind of built-in cornering advantage, like a car that's secretly better at turning left than right, and somehow that's a survival strategy instead of a manufacturing defect. Which brings us to something even stranger, the animal that turned this same idea into a full-blown magic trick. Let's talk about the pronghorn antelope, because the pronghorn's whole existence is, frankly, an insult to logic. Here's the setup. The pronghorn can sustain speeds over 55 miles an hour for miles at a time. Not a burst, not a panic sprint, miles. It has the aerobic capacity of something that shouldn't biologically exist on this continent, with a heart and lungs disproportionately massive for its body size, blood cells built for extreme oxygen delivery, and a body that basically treats cardio the way most animals treat breathing. And here's the punchline. Nothing in North America can catch it. Nothing alive today even comes close. Coyotes can't, wolves can't. Not even a car full of nervous biologists in a Jeep, historically, could keep pace with a determined pronghorn. So why on earth would evolution build a machine this absurdly overpowered for a predator landscape that doesn't require it?
Researchers studying pronghorn evolution propose something that still gives me chills, and I don't have a spine anymore, so that's saying something. The leading hypothesis is that pronghorns evolved their extreme speed to escape a predator that has been extinct for roughly 10,000 years, the American cheetah, a fast, pursuit-based hunter that vanished at the end of the last ice age. The pronghorn, in other words, is still running from a ghost. It is the single most overqualified prey animal on the continent, sprinting at speeds no living predator requires, because its body never got the memo that the monster is gone. I relate to this more than I'd like to admit. I've been dead for ages and I still flinch at loud noises. This is where I have to be honest with you. We don't know if the pronghorn remembers anything about the American cheetah. Obviously, that's not how evolution or memory works. What we do know is that natural selection doesn't clean up its unused features quickly. A trait that isn't actively costly can just stick around, echoing a threat that stopped existing thousands of years ago. It's less the pronghorn is haunted and more evolution is a hoarder who never throws anything out just in case. You're standing in an open grassland, and out on the horizon, a pronghorn lifts its head. It hasn't seen a predator that could actually catch it in 10 millennia. And yet every single time it runs like its life depends on outrunning something that stopped existing before humans invented the wheel. That's not fear, that's inheritance. Myth 1. True or false? Myth: the fastest land animal on Earth, the cheetah, could catch a pronghorn in open terrain. False, and it's not particularly close. Why it's false? Cheetahs are explosive sprinters, not endurance athletes. A cheetah can hit incredible top speeds, but only for roughly 20 to 30 seconds before its own body temperature becomes the real threat. More on that in a second. While a pronghorn can maintain elite speed for miles. It's the difference between a 100-meter dash and a marathon, except one of the runners is also trying not to have a heart attack from overheating mid-race. Speaking of terrible decisions cheetahs are forced to make, let's talk about the actual physics of why the fastest animal title is kind of a trap. Everyone loves to talk about the cheetah's top speed. Nobody wants to talk about the cheetah's thermostat, and honestly, that's the more interesting story. A sprinting cheetah generates heat so fast that its internal body temperature climbs dangerously close to a threshold that would cause brain damage if sustained. This isn't a minor inconvenience. This is a hard biological ceiling. A cheetah at full sprint is essentially in a race against its own skull cooking itself. And if the chase runs too long, the cheetah has to abandon it. Not because it's tired in the way you get tired jogging to catch a bus, but because continuing would be lethal. Fast fact 2. Field studies tracking cheetah hunts found that the majority of chases last under a minute, and a large share fail entirely, not because the cheetah isn't fast enough, but because the prey simply survives long enough through evasive turning for the cheetah to hit its thermal and energetic limit and give up. This is the part wildlife documentaries tend to gloss over, because record-breaking speed is a better headline than elite predator forced into early retirement by its own biology every single time it works. But it's the truth. The cheetah isn't undefeated. The cheetah is playing a game with a built-in time limit, like a video game boss fight where the floor is lava and the lava is also inside you. So why would evolution build a predator this fragile? Because speed and endurance are biologically opposites competing for the same resources. Muscle fiber built for explosive power isn't built for sustained oxygen efficiency. You can have one or the other in extreme form, rarely both. The cheetah chose the nuclear option, maximum speed, minimum sustainability, essentially becoming evolution's answer to what if we built a supercar with a 5-mile range.
This is less apex predator and more tiny caffeinated accountant managing an energy budget it cannot afford to overspend, except the accountant is also capable of outrunning a car in a school zone. Which is exactly why prey animals don't need to be faster than a cheetah. They just need to survive the first 30 seconds. Now, here's a behavior that took researchers decades to properly explain, and it's one of my personal favorite pieces of evidence that animals are constantly running elaborate social experiments we barely understand. You've probably seen footage of gazelles or springbok doing that weird stiff-legged bounce, all four legs leaving the ground at once, back arched, looking less like fleeing and more like an extremely committed interpretive dance. That's called stotting or pronking, and for a long time people assumed it was just excess energy or confusion, or maybe a species-wide inside joke. It's not a joke, it's a message, and the message is aimed directly at the predator. Researchers studying Thompson gazelles and cheetahs found something remarkable. Gazelles were more likely to stot in front of a predator that was actually stalking them, and cheetahs were significantly less likely to pursue gazelles that stotted vigorously. The stronger and more energetic the stot, the more likely the predator was to just walk away. Why? Because stotting is what's called an honest signal. A weak, sick, or injured gazelle physically cannot pull off a high-energy four-legged bounce while a predator is watching. Only a genuinely fit gazelle can afford to burn that much energy showing off instead of running. So the stot isn't decoration, it's a gazelle looking a cheetah dead in the eyes and saying, in body language, I am so fit that chasing me would be a complete waste of your limited window before your brain starts cooking.
And the cheetah, being a rational economic agent who has read the room, usually just picks a different gazelle. Evolution looked at this idea, telegraphing your athletic ability directly to your own predator instead of just running immediately, and somehow approved it, which tells you everything you need to know about how strange the math of survival actually gets. Fast fact 3. Stotting has also been observed to work as a kind of alarm broadcast. One gazelle stotting can trigger a ripple of stotting through the herd, essentially crowdsourcing the warning, which is basically prehistoric social media, except the algorithm is predator nearby and the engagement metric is did everyone survive? Which brings us to something even stranger, an animal that doesn't outrun its predator at all. It just makes sure the predator physically cannot finish its strike in time. I want you to sit with this number for a second because it broke my brain the first several hundred times I watched it happen. A rattlesnake strike is one of the fastest predatory movements in the animal kingdom, closing distance in a fraction of a second. And yet kangaroo rats, small, unassuming desert rodents, survive rattlesnake strikes at a startlingly high rate. Not because they see the strike coming with their eyes. Human reaction time alone wouldn't be fast enough to dodge it even if they did. They survive because of a reflex arc so fast it barely qualifies as a decision in any sense you or I would recognize. This is one of those moments where I have to be careful with the science, because it's tempting to say the kangaroo rat decides to jump. It doesn't, not consciously, not in the time available. High-speed footage of these encounters shows kangaroo rats initiating an evasive leap in roughly 1/10 of a second after detecting vibration or contact cues, faster than the strike itself completes, using specialized hind limbs and an enlarged auditory structure that can detect the low-frequency thump of a striking snake almost instantly. This is reflex, not strategy, though the reflex itself is the product of an enormous amount of evolutionary strategizing that happened long before this particular rat was born. It's less the Matrix bullet dodging and more your knee jerking when a doctor taps it with a little rubber hammer, except in this version, the hammer is a venomous ambush predator, and the stakes are, everything. Fast fact 4. Some kangaroo rat populations that coexist with rattlesnakes for many generations show measurably better strike evasion performance than populations with little snake exposure, suggesting this reflex isn't fixed. It can be fine-tuned across generations depending on local predation pressure, like a video game difficulty setting that quietly adjusts itself based on how often you're getting hit. Not every kangaroo rat pulls this off. Younger, less experienced individuals get caught more often, and even skilled adults occasionally lose the gamble. This isn't a guaranteed superpower, it's a statistical edge, stacked hard enough in the rat's favor across a lifetime of encounters that natural selection kept building on it generation after generation. Which brings us to a completely different survival tactic, one that doesn't rely on speed or reflex at all, but on making the predator's own brain betray it.
Here's a term you've probably never heard, and once you learn it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Protean behavior. It's the scientific name for deliberately unpredictable movement patterns used specifically to make an animal harder to catch, not through speed, but through chaos. Think of a moth's erratic, jittering flight path, or a fish darting in sudden, seemingly random directions when a predator gets close, or a squirrel's infamous inability to just pick a direction and commit to it when a car is coming. Fast fact 5. Squirrels crossing roads use an evasion strategy that works shockingly well against their natural predators, hawks, which rely on predicting a fleeing animal's path and intercepting it. Random, erratic zigzagging makes that prediction nearly impossible for a hawk. The exact same strategy makes squirrels look like they've never encountered a car in their life, because from an evolutionary standpoint, they haven't. Cars are new, hawks are old, and evolution hasn't finished patching the update. This is the part where humans really overestimate themselves, by the way. You've probably yelled at a squirrel for not knowing to just run straight across the street. But the squirrel isn't malfunctioning. It's running flawless, time-tested predator evasion software on hardware built for a completely different threat. You thought you'd outsmart a system that's been optimized for millions of years against actual airborne killers. Spoiler, the squirrel was never optimized to understand your Honda Civic and also didn't care. Predators, especially ambush and pursuit predators, rely heavily on trajectory prediction, essentially running a constant mental calculation of where will this thing be in half a second. An animal that moves erratically breaks that calculation completely. It's the biological equivalent of a poker player who bluffs so inconsistently that no opponent can ever build a reliable read on them. Predictability is the actual currency being spent in every chase, not just speed, and protean prey animals are refusing to spend it. You're a hawk, mid-dive, locked onto a squirrel's path, committed to an intercept angle you calculated a full second ago. The squirrel suddenly reverses. Your entire flight plan, calculated at speed with talons extended, becomes instantly useless. You don't get a do-over mid-dive. That's not bad luck. That's the squirrel's ancestors winning an argument that started before either one of you were born. Which brings us to a completely different animal that takes unpredictable and turns it into a full disappearance act.
Octopuses aren't technically prey animals being chased in the traditional running across grassland sense, but I'm including this one because it might be the single most creative escape strategy I've ever watched, and I've watched a genuinely absurd amount of chases. When threatened, an octopus can release a cloud of ink that isn't just a smokescreen. It actively interferes with a predator's sense of smell, temporarily dulling chemoreceptors, essentially jamming the predator's tracking sensors mid-pursuit. Combine that with jet propulsion through rapid water expulsion, instant camouflage through skin cells that change color and texture in a fraction of a second, and the ability to squeeze a body with no internal skeleton through a gap barely wider than its own eyeball, and you get an animal that doesn't outrun threats so much as it erases itself from the situation entirely. Fast fact 6. Some octopus species have been documented releasing a decoy ink blob roughly their own body size and shape, sometimes referred to informally as a pseudomorph, then jetting away in a completely different direction while the confused predator attacks a cloud of ink wearing essentially an octopus costume. This is dark comedy at its finest. The octopus isn't just fleeing, it's leaving behind a stunt double made of its own bodily fluid and letting the predator fight a ghost. I would know, I am one. Studies on octopus-predator encounters suggest ink release is used selectively, not randomly. Octopuses appear to modulate ink use based on the type of threat, using visual ink clouds more against sight-based predators like fish, and using it less against predators that hunt primarily by smell, where the chemical interference becomes the more valuable weapon. That's not blind panic. That's an animal with no bones and questionable long-term memory making a tactical decision under pressure in real time every time. Which brings us to a myth I need to personally, aggressively debunk because I've watched hundreds of humans get this wrong, sometimes fatally. Myth: if an animal freezes and stares at you, it's about to attack. False and dangerously oversimplified. Why it's false?
Freezing is very often a decision-making pause, not aggression. Many animals, including deer, rabbits, and various reptiles, rely on stillness because their predator detection systems are heavily motion-based. Standing still can actually make an animal harder to detect or harder to predict, buying it time to assess threat level before committing to fight, flight, or continued freezing. Misreading a freeze as either safe or hostile is exactly the kind of mistake that gets overconfident humans, myself very much included, into situations that end with a dislocated shoulder and wet grass. Speaking of terrible decisions, let's talk about the actual cost-benefit math predators run before they even start a chase, because most chases you'll never see are the ones that get called off before they begin. Here's something documentaries almost never show you, because it's undramatic and doesn't make for good footage. Most potential chases never happen at all. Predators are constantly running silent cost-benefit calculations, and a huge percentage of the time the answer comes back not worth it, and the predator simply doesn't commit. Energy is the actual currency of survival, more than teeth, more than claws, more than raw speed. A chase that fails still costs calories the predator has to earn back somewhere else. Multiple failed chases in a row can put a predator in real trouble, especially in lean seasons. So predators aren't reckless gamblers throwing themselves at every meal option. They're closer to cautious investors, constantly weighing effort against probable return. Fast Fact 7. Studies tracking African wild dogs found their hunting success rate is remarkably high compared to solitary predators like lions, in part because wild dogs are extremely selective about which chases they commit to as a group, favoring targets that show early signs of vulnerability, distance miscalculation, or separation from the herd. Essentially, they're not the fastest predator in the room, they're the best at reading a spreadsheet before making a move. This is why so many prey animals invest heavily in signals like stotting, alert postures, or simply standing tall and staring directly at an approaching predator. It's not bravado, and it's definitely not stupidity. It's advertising. It's a prey animal broadcasting, "I have already seen you, I am healthy, and this chase will cost you more than it's worth," in the hope the predator does the math and walks away. Sometimes that message is a bluff. Often it's completely true. Which brings us to the exception that breaks almost everything I just told you, because nature loves nothing more than proving its own rules wrong. Everything so far has been about speed, reflex, unpredictability. So let's talk about an animal that is, by comparison, embarrassingly slow and still manages to be nearly impossible to actually catch and finish off: the honey badger. Honey badgers aren't fast, they're not stealthy, they don't have elaborate ink-based escape plans. What they have is a body built like a tank wearing loose, thick, famously hard-to-grip skin, combined with a reputation for continuing to fight back after injuries that would end most confrontations immediately. Multiple documented cases describe honey badgers surviving venomous snake bites, in part due to some resistance to certain venom components, and simply continuing to fight or eat shortly afterward. Predators that could physically overpower a honey badger in a straight fight frequently choose not to, because the cost of actually finishing the job, enduring an opponent that keeps fighting well past the point most animals would give up, often isn't worth the injury involved. The honey badger isn't hard to catch, it's hard to want to catch, which might be an even better strategy.
This is less unbeatable warrior and more the animal kingdom's equivalent of that one coworker nobody wants to argue with in a meeting, not because they're right, but because the sheer exhausting commitment isn't worth the trouble. Honey badgers have been documented digging through surprisingly tough barriers and even reversing escape attempts back toward a threat rather than away from it, a level of confidence that field researchers have described essentially as fearless to the point of tactical unpredictability, which, if you think back to Part 6, is its own kind of protean advantage, just with significantly more teeth involved. Which brings us to the last piece of this puzzle, the myth that ties almost everything together, and the one I hear the absolute most. Myth: humans, with training and effort, could outrun most wild animals over a long enough distance. Partially true, and this one's actually fascinating, not just embarrassing. Why it's complicated? Humans are genuinely elite endurance runners by mammalian standards. Exceptional sweat-based cooling, upright posture, and long Achilles tendons that store and release energy efficiently give humans real endurance advantages over many four-legged animals in hot conditions over very long distances, which is part of the basis for persistence hunting used historically by some human groups tracking animals like kudu across extreme heat until the animal overheated. But, and this is the part people conveniently forget before doing something like sprinting after a jackrabbit on an Idaho hillside, that advantage only exists over long distances in heat against certain animals with training, patience, and tracking skill. Over short distances, against basically anything we've discussed in this entire video, you lose, immediately, embarrassingly, with, in my case, personal injury. Myth: the loudest, most aggressive-looking chase behavior means the predator is winning. False, and often the opposite. Why it's false? High-intensity, visibly dramatic chases are frequently failed hunts, not successful ones. The moments of true predator success are often disturbingly quiet, brief, and over before either animal expends much visible effort at all. The dramatic, sustained, screaming chase you picture in your head is, more often than not, footage of something not working. And that's only half the story, because now we need to talk about what all of this actually means for you, standing there, alive, presumably not currently being chased by anything. I promised you agency, not just a highlight reel of me getting humbled by rabbits, so here's the actual usable version of everything we've covered if you ever find yourself closer to wildlife than intended. 1. Do not run in a straight line from an animal built for turning, because you will lose that geometry problem every single time, the same way I did. 2. If an animal freezes and stares, do not assume aggression or safety. Back away slowly and give it space to make its own decision, because you have no idea what calculation is happening in that pause. 3. Loud, dramatic animal behavior like stotting or aggressive posturing is frequently a warning display, not an attack. Recognize it as communication, not chaos. 4. Never assume slow means safe to approach, because some of the most dangerous animals on this list rely on tenacity and resistance rather than speed. 5. If you're ever in a genuine wildlife encounter requiring distance, unpredictable lateral movement is generally smarter than a flat-out sprint, because you are not fast enough to win a straight race against almost anything we've discussed today. 6. Respect the abandonment threshold. Many animals are actively deciding whether you're worth the energy cost of engaging with, so making yourself look larger, louder, and less worth the trouble is a legitimate, evidence-based strategy, not just folklore. 7. Give any wild animal an obvious, unblocked escape route. A huge number of dangerous encounters happen because an animal felt cornered, not because it wanted a confrontation in the first place. 8. Remember that heat and endurance matter more than raw speed in most real encounters. This cuts both ways, for you and for whatever you're trying to avoid. 9. If you're genuinely being pursued by something with a documented top speed, your best move is rarely to try to outrun it in a straight line. Controlled, sudden direction changes cost predators far more than they cost you. 10. And maybe the most important one, appreciate all of this from a respectful distance, because every single story in this video started with an animal that was minding its own business, until a human, often me, decided to get involved. Which brings us to the last thing I actually want to leave you with. I've spent what feels like an unreasonable slice of eternity watching these encounters play out, over and over, across species, across continents, across weather systems I don't even feel anymore. And if there's one thing being dead has actually taught me, it's this. None of this is cruelty, and none of this is a war. It's an absurdly elegant negotiation that's been running for millions of years, refined by an unfathomable number of failed attempts on both sides. Every jackrabbit's turn, every pronghorn's ridiculous unnecessary speed, every stot, every ink cloud, every honey badger's stubborn refusal to acknowledge that it's supposed to lose. None of that is malice, it's math. It's engineering. It's generations of trial and error compressed into instinct, running silently under the surface of something that looks, from the outside, like simple panic. You don't have to fear it. You're allowed to just be amazed by it.
The animal that ended my little sprinting career on that hillside wasn't trying to hurt me. It was running a program older than language, older than tools, older than the concept of a guy in his 20s deciding he could catch a rabbit for absolutely no reason. I was never the threat it thought I was. I was just the latest entry in a very, very long list of things that thought they could win. So here's my actual advice, for whatever it's worth, from someone who technically doesn't have a pulse anymore. The next time you see something small and fast disappear into the grass, don't feel outsmarted. Feel lucky. You just watched several million years of engineering work exactly as intended in real time for free, and all it cost you was your dignity. Mine cost me a shoulder. I'll be around. I'm always around. Being dead really cleared up my schedule. If you want more videos like this, subscribe.